Hi guys, it's Rob Flux here from Property Development Network, coming to you for yet another Sunday session. Now, whoops, looks like I've forgotten to start my video. So here I am back in the flesh, not in my usual environment, so I haven't got my usual full monitors and everything. I'm doing this from a laptop. One of the projects that I'm working on in Salisbury, a subdivision that we did a very minor reno on, and I guess out here on site today, and I guess didn't get a chance to get back into the office. So here we are running our session. We're going to be talking about selling off the plan and what are some of the things that we need to know and consider when we're thinking about selling off the plan. So let's take a look at, so just because I'm not using my usual screen, God damn it. Let's start again. That's what I should have been sharing right from the start. So bad start to the recording, folks, because I'm not using my usual environment. So here we go again, selling off the plan, how and what you need to know in order to progress your journey. So, okay, so some of the challenges that you're going to have in coming off the plan, there's quite a bit to actually think about, to be honest. I guess, firstly, why would you want to sell off the plan? There's a lot of reasons that are actually going to go into that. So firstly, you may actually require that for your finance approval. Now, if you're trying to use one of the big four banks, they are quite stringent on their finance requirements, and they will typically ask you to get what they call debt coverage for your project. And that debt coverage for the project may be that you need to get anywhere between 80 all the way up to 120% of the debt covered. So let's just say you've got a project that might have a total development cost of, say, $3.5 or $4 million. What they want you to do is sell enough of those off the plan to get $4 million worth of sales. And obviously that only leaves one or two of your dwellings left that you can then sell as the finished product. So it becomes quite challenging to sell those off the plan. So that's the first one, is you may require that for finance approval. Now, if you start to use non-banks, so second-tier banks or people who specialize in development funding, then they become a lot less stringent on that requirement. Now, the reason why you might want to push for I guess the big four banks is a lower interest rate or a perceived lower interest rate. And I'm going to come to that as to the perceived nature of that a little bit later, versus, I guess, the opportunity cost of actually progressing forward straight away. So finance approval, that's one of the reasons why you might want to pre-sale. The next one is you might want to maximize the price that you're actually achieving in a rising market. So right now, the market is taking off, and you might want to say, well, I want to maximize this sale right now because it's going to take me some time to actually sell the finished product, to create the finished product, I should say. And by that time, we may be in another market and we want to minimize the risk of that market dropping off later on. So you want to maximize the current uplift and minimize the drop lift. And the other one is you may actually just want a project risk reduction. So now in trying to do a risk reduction on your project, there's a lot of things to consider. So, you know, there's the opportunity cost of getting into the deal. There's the fact that I guess you're not 100% sure what the cost of construction is going to be, all of those sorts of things. And so you want to get the risk off the table and say, I want to absolutely categorically lock in the fact that this deal is done and dusted from a profitability perspective. I know exactly what it is. And that way you can then start to know that you can spend money in the next deal, okay? So opportunity cost, okay? So being able to have certainty on this outcome means that you can then, I guess, potentially roll into another project. So there's some of the reasons that we'd actually consider. Now, some other elements to the process would be, for example, who do you use to sell, I guess, these projects? So do you use a typical real estate agent or do you use what is called a project marketer? Now, a typical agent is going to struggle with off-the-plan sales. And the reason for that is they're used to doing home opens where they show people through the property, but because the property does not yet exist, it makes it quite difficult for them when they're used to those traditional sales methods to try and get people excited about the product, because they can't touch it, they can't taste it, they can't smell it, they can't feel it, all those sorts of things. And so they have to now start to put into the purchaser's mind the visualization of what that's actually going to look like. They have to, I guess, engage that vendor's imagination to say, well, what's your furniture going to look like? What's the color scheme going to look like? All those sorts of things. And so a typical agent will struggle with doing that because they're more used to, I guess, the more traditional approach of walking somebody through the finished home. Now, you may want to use a typical agent because they've got a lower commission, but as I said, because they're going to struggle, it might take quite some time to actually get that sale away. But it's also difficult when you're using traditional agents to get the maximum price for a whole bunch of reasons that I'm going to touch on later when you're trying to sell off the plan, okay? So a more typical way of selling when you're doing off the plan is using project marketers. Now, a project marketer is very different to your traditional agent. They are generally someone who specializes just in off-the-plan sales, and they have what is called a two-tiered marketing system. That is, they have a network of people that they distribute the stock out to, and typically you won't see it advertised in many places, but instead it goes through what they call the channel, and the channel consists of people like accountants, financial planners, those sorts of things, who may have high net worth individuals who are looking for stock that they can purchase in order to be able to claim the appropriate tax deductions, negative gearing, all those sorts of things. And so as a result of that, because there's the two-tier, there's the project market themselves, and there's also the channel, the commission rates for selling these things are quite high because that commission needs to be split between two lots of people. So as a result of that, the commission can be as high as 7% of the purchase price, but often it's actually a fixed fee or a fixed price for, I guess, whatever the stock is, and that can range anywhere from $20,000 to $50,000 per dwelling or per product that you're actually creating. So quite high fees on these things. Now, whenever you get those fees, typically 50% of the commission is paid upon signing off the contract, which means that it can be quite a challenge for your cash flow because you might get, let's just say, 5 or 6 sales away. You've got to pay for 5 or 6 lots of commission on an income stream that you've not yet received. And so you want to make sure that you consider that. Now, the balance of the commission is paid at settlement. Now, that may or may not ever occur for a whole bunch of reasons. You may never get to the point of finishing your project. If you don't get enough pre-sales away, you may never start the construction. If the market changes, you might change your mind. You might not want to create the stock. So a whole bunch of reasons. So the project marketing team is taking a risk that they may never actually get the balance, which is why they ask for 50% of it up front, okay? Now, because of the fact that they're selling it through that channel partnership, typically the kind of stock that you're going to be pushing through that network will typically be investment grade product, okay? So it may not necessarily be your owner occupier type stock. And so if you're trying to sell to investors, your project marketing channel is generally the way that you want to try and start to do that. Now, so there's a whole bunch of reasons why you want to sell potentially off the plan. Now, if, for example, you need to do that off the plan sale or pre-sale for finance reasons, one of the reasons I touched on before, because you want to get those lower interest rates, or maybe your financier just wants to de-risk the project, then typically the financier will put a whole bunch of rules around what is deemed to be a qualifying pre-sale. Now, let's touch on what I mean by that, okay? So firstly, the bank will determine how much debt coverage they want, but when they do that, it must be a qualifying pre-sale. So that means it must be an arm's length transaction. So you can't sell from yourself to your brother or sister, or to a family member, or to your self-managed super fund. It has to be arm's length. It has to be done at market value, okay? Then typically needs to be no more than about 15% of the stock being sold to either interstate or overseas buyers. And the reason for that is they are, the banks generally deem that those people are ill-informed about the market and potentially outside in a different jurisdiction. So if they do crash the contract at a later point in time, then the bank has no recourse in being able to chase them because they're in a different lawful jurisdiction. So the banks don't like that. So the next thing is the bankers want to make sure that the person actually purchasing or signing that pre-sale contract actually has some skin in the game and they're genuinely, legitimately going to go through with it. So they will say that in the majority of instances, they must have a 10% deposit and they must have no clauses at all that make the contract subject to anything. So subject to finance or anything like that. Now, often you will need to give a period of time where it's, 14 days or 21 days, which is subject to finance, but only at the point where it becomes unconditional on finance does the bank then deem that to be a qualifying pre-sale. Now, as a result of that, that can be quite challenging in order to actually get a legitimate pre-sale. And so what you may find is you get some pre-sales away that make you happy because it's de-risked your side of things, but in the bank's eyes, it hasn't de-risked their side of things. So the bank's going to go, hang on, that's not quite what we had in mind, and we're not going to quite count that one, so please go get another one for us. Now, when you're only selling half a dozen product and they want 80 to 100% debt coverage, the difference between that 80% debt coverage and I guess the entire revenue may only be one extra dwelling. So as soon as one qualifying pre-sale doesn't count, you may have to sell the very last product, which might be where all your profits stacked. So you don't want to do that unnecessarily. So be very careful on that. Now, let's have a look at when a pre-sale happens, some things that you might want to consider that might actually impact the profitability of your project, okay? So whether you sell off the plan or whether or not you sell as a finished product, there's a few different elements that you want to consider from the profitability side of things. So firstly, selling off the plan, you will typically have to have a valuer value the product based on the specifications you've defined to say, well, what would that be worth in the market right now? Now, whenever you have a valuer trying to give you a value on something that does not yet exist, you have to give them a whole bunch of information to say, well, these are the specs, this is the taps, this is the flooring, this is the color scheme, this is what the exterior of the product's going to look like, all that sort of thing, so they can make an informed decision. Now, whenever they're not sure, they always have a range that they can typically come in, the high end of the range or the low end of the range. When they're not 100% sure on exactly what you're creating versus something comparable in the market, they're always going to be at the lower end of the scale. As a result, when the valuer sets that baseline, that's going to be what you're going to be going out to market trying to get a price point for. Now, if we were selling as a finished product, then we get emotional people starting to get attached to that. And so quite often they'll push the price point up because they're emotionally attached. But when they're buying off the plan and off a set of schematics and a set of specification sheets, they tend to become less emotional and a lot more factual. So they pay a lot more attention to that valuer side of things. So the valuer has typically discounted what you might get if it was sold as a finished product. The next thing that you might consider in impacting your cost is the fact that there are actually delays in the sales process. So it takes quite some time to actually get those pre-sales away. Now, they have to go through channels. That's going to take time to mark it up. It's going to take time to find people that are actually willing to do that. And sometimes it might take 3, 6, sometimes 12 months to get the number of pre-sales away that you need. Now, in the meantime, you've actually had a whole bunch of holding costs in holding the project for that long. Now, those holding costs, whilst it's not at peak debt, it is, I guess the acquisition stage and a lot of your development approvals and all that sort of thing, you've actually accumulated quite a bit of debt to this point. So your holding costs start to blow out. You've got rates, you've got land tax, and you've got a whole bunch of things that start to add up quite quickly. So selling off the plan can actually create a lot more costs in how the baseline of the project actually runs. Now, the next thing is anyone buying off the plan, I guess the ultimate purchaser, they're typically going to start to ask for discounts. And the reason why they're going to ask for discounts is they're taking a risk on the fact that the product that you promised to create may not necessarily match the shiny brochureware that you've actually created for them that says what it's actually going to be. So they've got a list of specifications, absolutely. They've got a list of floor plans, absolutely, but they're not 100% sure what the build quality is going to be like. You know, they can't see it, they can't feel it, they can't necessarily imagine their furniture in there. So they're going to start to ask for a discount. Now, remember that the discount they're asking on is on a discount that the valuer has already discounted already. So you're kind of getting a discount on a discount, okay? Plus the agent's fees, as I touched on before, because you're going through project marketers, they tend to be a lot higher from a fees perspective. So when you start to look at all of that, selling off the plan takes a whole bunch of wax on your profitability. Okay, so you know, by the time you do that, the amount of income stream that you're going to generate is much lower. Now, on the other hand, if you choose to push ahead and if you want to sell as completed product, well, now you're in a really tricky position. Okay, so you may have to use a non-bank, so a non-traditional bank, which means that, you know, somebody who specializes in development funding, where they will allow you to do the construction without the pre-sales. And whenever they do that, they're taking a risk on you and the fact that you may not sell that. So they will generally start to ratchet up their interest rates. So that has an impact on your profitability as well. Also, by the time you actually create the sale at the end, you finish the product, you're going to start selling as the finished product. You're going to get the maximum price humanly possible. But remember, at this point, you have already incurred the maximum amount of debt in the project. You are at peak debt. You've done all of your purchase. You've done all your development approval. You've done all your construction. You are now at peak debt. And so now there starts to become a lot of pressure on the sales themselves. And so if the sales don't turn over in a very quick period of time, then straight away the holding costs at that finished product end start to become much bigger. And so that pressure can actually force you to start to discount straight away just because of the fact that you need to get things moving, okay? So whilst you have the perception of a higher price point, you have these things that start to knock you down. Now, when you do the math between the two approaches, do I sell off the plan or do I sell as a finished product? What you tend to find is that the financiers who specialize in that construction funding and allow you to construct without the pre-sales in play, they've kind of worked the math on this out, and they kind of make it just cheap enough that it's more attractive for you to just push ahead, okay? Now, you'll look at their interest rates and go, well, they're extraordinarily high, but you know, they've factored in all of those things that I mentioned, that the hidden costs that you'll see when you're trying to sell off the plan, and they know that the rates that they're putting, while quite high, still make it quite attractive for you to try and push forward. So then there's the hybrid approach to say, well, what if I get that pre-sale, that funding approval without the requirement for pre-sales, and I start the construction at that point, because we can actually see activity happening on site, that will actually make the fact that activity is happening, that will make the pre-sales actually happen much faster. See, one of the things that stop people signing off the plan is the fact that, hey, you've got to sell 6 of these things, and I happen to be person number 1. How long is it going to take you to sell the other 5? So am I going to wait for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months before you actually start constructing? And so the first person to sign is always quite reluctant because they don't know how long they're going to wait. Second person becomes a little less reluctant until they finally get to the last person, and you go, well, this signature is actually going to get me my finance, and so we're going to start straight away. That person's willing to sign up much faster. So right at the start of those pre-sales, that can be quite challenging. Now, as I said, if you do this hybrid approach, you get the pre-approval to start constructing. At this point, everybody sees activity happening on the site. They can see that the bulldozers are in doing the work. They can see that the builder's out on site with his hammer and nails and actually putting up the framing and all those sorts of things. And so it's much more likely that they're going to potentially sign up for that pre-sale whilst it's actually underway. And at that point also, you can, with the builder's permission, do a site inspection, show them around as to what it's actually going to look like, and depending upon how far through the stages are, they'll actually have a little bit of a feel as to what the finished product is going to look like, even though it's not actually finished. Okay, so whichever approach you take, if you're going to be selling off the plan, okay, there's a whole bunch of things that you need to start to think about from a marketing perspective in order to make this attractive to the final person. Remember, what I said was they can't see it, so they can't imagine what it looks like. They can't touch it, they can't feel it, they can't walk through it. So you have to spark their imagination, okay? You have to give them all of the insights to help them to actually say, visualize, what is this going to look like? So the first part we're going to do is we're going to give them obviously a floor plan so they can actually see what it looks like, and give them all of the information about the room sizes and dimensions and the layout, all that sort of stuff. We'll also give them a spec sheet. The spec sheet will say, well, this is what the flooring looks like. You know, this is the kind of tile, this is the kind of carpets, this is the color scheme, these are the kind of taps that we're going to do. You know, this is the shower rows, all of those sorts of things, so that you can actually, they can start to have a little bit of a feel for that. So not only will you give that to them in a spec sheet, but you will also give them what is called, or you'll create what is called a mood board. So a mood board has a sample of all of those surfaces and all of those colors, and generally on a big piece of board, and they glue the tiles down and they glue the carpet down and they put all those elements together. So you actually get some good insights into, okay, I can physically see that all these colors match, and it's actually going to start to look good. Now, depending upon the size of your project, you might want to consider doing 2 or 3 different color schemes so that they can choose, well, do I want the beige one or do I want the gray one? Okay, so you might have 2 or 3 different color palettes to choose from that you have pre-done all of that as specs up to. The next thing you want to do is you want to get some renders. Now, a render is a computer generated image of what the finished product is going to look like. Now, you can get different versions of renders, so you can get some that look a little more cartoonish like, and you can get what is called photorealistic. Okay, so photorealistic, as it sounds, looks and feels as if you were physically taking a real photo of the product. Now, obviously, it takes a lot more effort to create that, which means that the spec sheet that you have created needs to be given to the renderers, the people actually creating those images, in a lot of detail so they can try and mimic what it is that you're trying to do. Now, there are lots of different people who can do rendering. Okay, there are, I guess, your architect who has actually drawn up the plans in the first place. They can absolutely do renders, but there's also specialist rendering houses who all they do all day, every day is these photorealistic ones. Now, if you tend to get your architect to do it, because they're not doing the renders all the time, they tend to have not as photorealistic. And so they cannot, sometimes they're not going to be as smooth or as pretty as the people who specialize in these rendering houses. So make sure that if you're going to use renders, you spend a little bit of extra money to actually get them done properly, okay? Now, in putting together your rendered views, remember what we're trying to do is make the purchaser imagine that they're actually inside this property. And so you might have, maybe there's 10 rooms inside the entire property, and it's quite expensive to create the renders. So you may not want to create one for every single bedroom, for example. You may not want to create them for all of the bathrooms, but so there's a minimum number of imagery that you should always do, okay? Should always do the frontage. So what is the streetscape going to look like? So what are they going to be walking into every single time? What does the living room experience feel like? So, you know, is it open plan living? Is it boxed up? Well, they want to get a good feel on what that's going to look like. Kitchen, you know, is it a nice open plan kitchen? Has it got nice flow to it? Things like that. So make sure you do that master bedroom and then your main bathroom. So when you put those 5 together, that is the minimum set that you want to put together. Now, you may add on top of those some optional elements. You might show some imagery going and how the living area flows out into the backyards, for example. You might show a couple of the bedrooms, but when you start to put all this together, remember that these rendered images can actually be quite expensive to actually create. And the stock that you're creating, if you're doing a six-pack townhouse, are all 6 townhouses the exact same floor plan? And so when you start to put it together, you might have 3 or 4 different floor plans. So you might need those 5 images for a number of floor plan types. And so it can actually quite add up relatively quickly in putting that together. Now, assuming that you have, I guess, got someone interested, you've got their mood boards, you've got the renders, you've gone out through your project marketers, at the point where you go, right, I've got somebody willing to buy the property at this point in time, you can't just sign a normal contract, okay? Standard contracts don't apply when you're selling off the plan, and the reason is because the product doesn't actually exist. And so what you have to do is you have to have a custom contract called an off the plan contract, which declares all of the I guess the anticipated or proposed future state elements, okay? So these custom contracts will need to be individual for every single dwelling. Remember, each dwelling will have a slightly different floor plan, perhaps. They will have, they'll have different survey plans as to how much backyard they get and which particular, so you'll need one for lot 1, one for lot 2, one for lot 3, and each one will have slightly different outcomes. You'll need all the specifications with the colors, the tiles, the flooring, the taps. You'll need all of that all declared, okay? So by the time you do this, what you're trying to do is map out everything humanly possible through a disclosure statement to say, look, this is what we're trying to create, and this is the anticipation of how that's actually going to do. Now, in doing that, you're saying this is the proposed state, but sometimes you might have a particular tap that you want to use, and when it actually gets to the point of construction, that tap is no longer being produced, or the supplier is out of stock, and so things like that. So there's a little bit of minor wiggle room to say, look, we've done everything humanly possible to make this as identical as we can, but there's minor discrepancies that you may have to account for. So the contract, I guess, has a lot of T's and C's, terms and conditions, that sit around that to say, well, we're going to do everything humanly possible that we can, but we've got a little bit of wiggle room to say, if we can't get it, then we can substitute something of a similar style, color, quality, that sort of thing, okay? Now, the other thing is, because the contract, the product is not yet created, there is a timeline in which you must create the product, otherwise the contract expires, okay? So it's called a sunset date. Now remember, if you need to get 6 pre-sales away and person number 1 signs up front, you still need 5 more pre-sales before you even start the construction process. So person number 1 is going to be waiting a long time, waiting for person 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 to actually sign up before you physically start construction. So you need to have a timeline in there to say, look, if I take too long and if I don't actually create this, then person number 1 has the ability to walk away. It's called a sunset date. And typically, you as the developer want that as long as humanly possible, because you don't want you to get to person number 5 and you're right at the point where you're nearly there, and then person number 1's time has run out, so now he doesn't count anymore, so you need to get a replacement person for him. So, there's a balancing act where you want it for a really long period of time, but the person signing the contract, the person buying the property, they want that property now. They want to know that they can start planning moving in. They want to plan the end of their lease on their current property, or selling the existing dwelling, or whatever it is that they need to do to plan their life. They want to know exactly when that's going to happen. So it's a delicate dance between how long do you actually write into the contract. Now, what you'll see is that you're typically going to try and ask for anywhere up to 3 years, but the vendor trying to sign the contract is going to want something as little as 12 months. The challenge that you've got is, if you don't have a long enough timeline, there's an outside chance that even if that person has every single intention of purchasing, if you get to month 13 and they had 12 months in the contract, they're legally allowed to walk away. Well, roll back a couple of minutes ago when I started to talk about, well, what is a qualifying pre-sale? Well, at this point in time, the bank goes, hang on, that contract is no longer a valid contract, so I'm not happy that the person has the ability to physically complete, because they can walk away at any point in time. So it's a real delicate balance when you're trying to negotiate that sunset date. What I would say is, if you can try and get at least 18 months in there, that gives you a little bit of wiggle room to get a few more sales underway, plus get the construction actually occurring, so that you don't actually lose the original sales up front. So, you know, take note of that as you go, folks. So there you go, folks. Hoping that you got plenty out of that. I'm going to go in a moment to the audience and actually ask, you know, did anyone get any questions or anything like that? So let me just see. I'm just going to, before I do that, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the fact that we run these Sunday sessions most weeks, not every single week. We run them at 5 p.m. on a Sunday at Brisbane time, so depending upon where you are around the country. And we have a back catalogue of all of these that we have archived off to YouTube, so you can go to YouTube and look at all of the previous recordings and see how that actually stacks up for you. So note also that we run a couple of Facebook groups. We have the Property Developer Network group, and we also have one called Development Site Deal Hub, where you can actually do all of your off-market deals. It's a great place if you find a deal to flick on for a finder's fee, or equally if you're looking for a deal for somebody to actually come and grab that off you. So what I'm going to do now, folks, is I'm going to quickly jump over to Facebook, and hopefully we've got a whole bunch of people in there that are asking us a bunch of questions. So let's see who we've got any questions from at this point. So, okay. Lots of people saying hello. A couple of people saying was challenging with sound. Apologies, folks, I'm not in my normal live environment, so sorry for that. Yeah, a lot of people saying problems with sound. I'm really sorry if that's been the case, folks. But any questions? I'm looking for questions. Let's see what we've got. Is this my new house, Rob? The answer, no, Jane. This is actually a subdivision site that I'm running out at Salisbury. Have done a very minor renovation here, just sitting in one of the spare rooms. Had to do a little bit of work out there today, so didn't have a chance to get back into the office. Seeing what else. Nobody's actually got any questions. Matt's got a question. Tools to create mood boards. Mate, a mood board is actually, it's not a tool. It's actually usually a piece of plywood that you go and actually go to your tile supplier and get a sample. You go to your kitchen place, you get a sample of the top. You go to your carpet supplier, you get some samples. You go all of the different places and you put all those samples together and you put them together. Now, there are people who specialize in putting that together. If you go to your interior designer, that sort of thing, they generally offer that as a service where they'll actually do that. They'll source those samples, they'll put the mood board together, and they'll glue it all to the board and that sort of thing. They're physically quite large, quite heavy, that sort of thing, but very interesting. Matt says, are there electronic mood boards? Not that I've seen, mate. Good idea, but I think the problem is that people really want to see the product. Now, there's no reason why you couldn't do that on some sort of PDF and that sort of thing to share, but old school, people want to touch and feel and want to feel the texture, and, you know, they don't want to make sure that it's not plasticky and stuff like that. So, you know, sometimes things just don't replace old school. Liana says, yes, you can do a brochure online, absolutely. But quite often, depending upon the project that you're doing and depending upon the builder that you're using, quite often they'll actually put the boards together for you already, Matt. So hoping that helps. Looking for any other questions, folks? You guys are being a little bit shy at the moment. Do all valuers use Valex? No, they don't, Matt. So Valex is one of several different platforms that issue jobs out to valuers. Effectively, the banks will engage valuers through a panel system, and Valex is a panel system, but there are a couple of different panel systems out there, and each valuer would need to subscribe to one or more of those panel systems, and they would put it onto the panel, and then people bid for those jobs, or randomly allocates the job, and then that valuer will do the work. They'll submit the job back into Valex and or the platforms, and that will then push the results back to the bank, so that the bank gets to see the results, and you don't know which valuer company is actually going to use that at the time. So, okay, what other questions have we got? Joel says, if you had a purchase contract expire after 18 months and you had only just started construction, could the bank pull your finance? In a pure typical sense, Joel, they could, but typically what you'll find is because it's construction finance, at the point where they go, right, we're gonna actually sign off on this, everything's been signed off in principle till you get your pre-sales. You then take all the pre-sales to them and they'll say, right, looking at all the pre-sales that we've physically got here, one of them's got 12 months to go, no problem. Two of them have got 9 months to go, that'd be a bit shaky. One of them's got 6 months to go, I'm not going to allow that. So at that point, they'd say, sorry, we're not going to qualify that. We're not even going to start construction. We're not even going to fund that right up front. So they will do that right at the start rather than halfway through construction, because they don't want to get to the point where they're on shaky ground. Okay. Nathan says, can you recommend a photorealistic renderer? Mate, there are a bucket load of them. What I will say is that there's onshore resources. So here in Australia, there's also offshore resources. Now, the offshore resources tend to be a lot cheaper, but they don't necessarily understand, I guess, the visual aspect and visual element of what an Australian house and style looks like. Okay, so what I would suggest, if you want to have a balance of price point versus effectiveness and design aesthetics, then there are a number of companies that actually have onshore resources who manage the work, and they distribute the workloads overseas, and then the work is actually done offshore itself. So I'd be looking for a couple of those. Now, I won't name them on here, but if you want to reach out privately, I'm more than happy to list one or two that I have personally used in the past and have actually done some really good work. But that's not to say that they're the only ones out there, guys. Okay. Arun says, oh, hang on, I've missed a couple of questions. I'll come back to that one. Arun, give me 2 secs. Sound is a bit nasally. Hope you're getting better and better. Okay. Yes, I think the nasally is just the fact that I flew this morning wearing a mask for so long, you kind of get a little bit husky doing that. Arun says, I could not connect to this live even from laptop, but I can on mobile. Are you aware of any issue? I'm going to say that's an issue at your technical end, Arun. I'm really sorry, mate. But I'm not in IT anymore, so I'm not going to try and resolve that for you. Mark says, have you had any disputes with buyers when you had to substitute something for something similar in look and quality? So I've never personally had that happen, Mark, but I know that it is certainly something that can occur. I guess you've got to try and make sure that you've done everything humanly possible within your power to come up with an identical looking product. Now, I guess the way that the contracts are written is that there is a small variation allowed where they just don't have any say in the process, but it's what is deemed to be substantial change. So a substantial change would then trigger a default, and that would actually allow them to actually run away from the contract. So now I've never been in a situation where that has occurred, and I'm going to say, so long as you do everything within your power to come up with the alternative, even if you have to pay a little bit more for the product, I would absolutely do everything I can to make that happen. So, okay, folks, looks like that is the last of the questions. So thank you once again for, I guess, tuning in for this particular Sunday session. Apologies for the small technical challenges that we've had along the way with both sound and also image quality in this particular room, and me trying to navigate my PowerPoint slide right at the very start. But I guess looking forward to catching you all on our next one next Sunday at 5 o'clock. See you then. Bye for now.